To Canada? Was Saskatoon your stop?
Well, originally I was hired to work in Winnipeg.
Okay.
And got here in '82, I believe it was, and the economy was a mess. I remember mortgage rates being 17%, and the company in Winnipeg had laid off a bunch of people and told me that we're a union place, so you can't get back in until we hire all of these back.
Wow.
And they said, but we do have a place in something. I couldn't remember the name quite, but I said, I'll take it. And so, yeah, that's how I ended up here.
So where'd you immigrate from?
South Africa.
So why did you move to Winnipeg? What originally drew you there?
The climate, really.
The climate, yeah, of course. Of course. Yeah, it's like, I saw a meme yesterday. It was like, it's January 75th today or something. I'm like, yeah, it makes about sense. Anyway.
Yeah.
So the climate, what else brought you?
Well, my parents had come over. South Africa in those days when we talk about this, if we get into more depth about it, please laugh, because you're not going to believe some of the things I'll tell you. But at that point, it was necessary because South Africa was a highly segregated racial place, and we needed to get out to give our kids a chance. And my parents had come. Well, what happened originally was my older sister went to England, and they hated it in England. It was too wet and rainy, so they preferred the cold. Yeah. So they came over to Winnipeg, and then my parents followed, and siblings, and we were the last to come over. And basically, I had a skill that was being sought for here at that time, and so I came over to Winnipeg, got that job, went back. It took me about a year and a half to sell my business and get all the paperwork in place, and then by the time I got back over, the job didn't exist anymore. So,
so you had a business in South Africa?
Yes.
So you didn't, like, moving here, was it obviously just for your kids then? Because that seems like there's a lot of risk if you're giving up something that you are established in to a city you probably, have you even heard of it before?
No. Well, I had met a guy that worked for CEDA, which is a not-for-profit group that was putting water in small villages in a country called Swaziland, which is close to where I was, and a guy from Regina, actually. So I got a little bit of insight from him. We became good friends while he was over there. And of course, we weren't at that point, you couldn't take any money out of South Africa. So this good friend of mine helped me, and I used to pay him over there, and he'd put his check in Canada into a bank account for me. And this is my trust in Canadians, because when I came here, every single penny plus interest was waiting for me. And I really didn't know him that well. So a really interesting story.
He's probably a lawyer at YMCZ.
Probably, yeah.
Trustworthy. So you moved the whole family there. What does that look like for, like, how many kids? Who all came over?
Three children, 2 boys and a girl,
okay.
That were all born in South Africa. And and my wife Yvonne, who's still with me, thankfully.
Yeah.
I don't criticize her mother.
That's fair, that's fair. Honestly, every time I go home and my key works, it's like, oh, well, I won the lottery that day.
Right.
Or else she forgot to take her medication, one of the two. So you moved to Winnipeg, they lay you off, you decide to move to Saskatoon. You said you had some skills. What was this, like, what was that job, and why did you move to that job?
Yeah, I think that's a good segue to let you know a little bit about South Africa. So South Africa had the most laws of any country in the world, and a lot of them were racially based laws. So there was one called the Preservation of Jobs Act, which certain jobs were allocated to certain racial groups, so you couldn't cross the line. And I was just lucky, and I believe that, you know, just things happened to me along the way that I was very fortunate that they happened. And what happened was that I ended up in a small town in South Africa. You ready for a Zulu lesson?
Yeah, sure.
Can you say Matuba Tuba?
Matuba Tuba.
Or you can say Matuba twice.
Matuba, yeah.
Squared.
Yeah,
So I met this guy who really he had a small business, and he really needed somebody. And I had been around diesel engines all my life. My dad ran a transportation business. And so that was natural for me, and I wanted to learn how to do it. But unfortunately, the Preservation of Jobs Act said that you could only be trained by a journeyman of the same race as you. So this was a problem because it was basically kept as a whites-only job in that way. So the guy really went to bat for me and fought, and we got special dispensation that he was allowed to train me, and I got into a trade called diesel fuel injection technician. And so that's what I did for 4 years and qualified from that, and then started my own business later on in South Africa.
So was the segregation, the apartheid, was it white and black, or was it white and any other race? Was it
Many
that
different
easy?
shades.
Yeah, was it that?
Yeah, so to give you an example, in my family alone, there was another act that came about called the Racial Reclassification Act. So they actually went through families and reclassified them. So there were many people whose lives were disrupted in this way. But in my family alone, there's 4 racial groups. White people were all one group. Okay. But then there's 26 different tribes in South Africa. They were all treated separately. And then you had Japanese, Chinese, in East Indian, what we call here, but Indian. They were all separate racial groups. And they all had to, there was another act called the Group Areas Act, which meant that you could only live in an area that was assigned to that racial group. So we should laugh.
Yeah.
That was my defense all the way through.
So once you decided you were going to leave, and obviously your money wasn't able to leave, but you had that figured out, you move to Winnipeg, you get laid off. What is that like? What's that second move like with the family? How long were you in Winnipeg?
Yeah, well, I didn't really get laid off. They kept the job offer open, but moved it to Saskatoon, which was not a unionized shop, so they were able to work me in that way. Yeah. So it was, I remember arriving here, February of 1982. 51st Street was gravel.
February. Nothing like immigrating to Saskatoon in February.
I couldn't believe it. We're coming into land, and I'm looking at those, everything's white. I didn't know what that was. But yeah, 51st Street, the whole north end was pretty much gravel road. Sutherland was like out of town. Yeah. I lived there at the beginning because we bought a little house in Sutherland, conserving money, wanting to be careful. So we bought a little place. We had to go outside to change our minds.
That's awesome. So you move here 82 in February. You start working. Was that DSG at that time?
No, I started working for a company called Pritchard Engineering that's now still in Winnipeg, known as Diesel Tech. Okay. They changed along the way, but Pritchard Engineering was here for quite a long time. They were in Sutherland, on Jessup Avenue in Sutherland. So I worked for Pritchard Engineering to start out. Okay. That only lasted about a year, and we were at a Christmas party, and a sales guy that was working there at the time was thinking of leaving, and we got talking, and at that time they had put us on job sharing, so we were getting 2 or 3 days a week work, and I realized that my life savings would be gone pretty quick, so I decided to make a move. So Bruce Putnam is his name. Bruce and I moved out and started what used to be called Saskatoon Diesel Services at the time.
So okay, we're going to come back and forth because I'm fascinated by this already. So it used to be Saskatoon Diesel Services.
Yes.
Is DSG used to be, or was there some transitions in between?
No, what happened was I started trying to own the whole world, and we expanded. So I had Regina, Swift Current, and Red Deer. And we changed the name then. We were doing quite a bit of business down in the States at the time, and people were having a hard time saying Saskatoon. So we changed it to Diesel Services Group, which is where the DSG comes from. But after a few years, I sold off those 2 employees. Swift Current is still going. Red Deer and Regina closed down. And just moved back, concentrated back in Saskatoon again.
So how many years have you been in business then?
Since 1983.
So that's incredible. Congratulations.
Thank you.
So, I mean, the whole story so far sounds like there's a lot of risk to, like, I think anybody that hasn't immigrated anywhere and started all over, or not only did you move your family, you moved twice, start a business. It seems like a lot of risk. Do you consider yourself a risk taker, or was it just something natural? Or how did you, in your brain, think that this was going to be like,
You know,
was a good decision?
I really think of it in a way that I don't think I've done anything special. I think that what happens is there's circumstances and events and things that happen, and you fight some, you go along with some, and I think that there's a central passion, and that guides you, and I think you need to stay true to that. And so my central passion really was the equality of man. It just blew my mind in South Africa how people were treated, that you could treat people so differently according to what color they were. So the central thing was equality of man. And as I went along with that, I started to realize how powerful diversity is. And you know, that's the big thing, even in our business today. And I work a lot with kids. I do a lot of soccer coaching. And sometimes I think, why don't we just let them run the country? Because they know how diversity works. You see them together, and there seems to be no problem until we educate them and make them think otherwise.
Yeah, it's funny when you say we educate them. It's not just education though. It's like this cultural brainwash. I almost feel like I have young kids too, and they seem to have a better grip on what matters.
Yeah.
But in 10 years, they're screwed.
You know,
In 10 years, they're going to be jaded, just like their old man.
I was very fortunate. Shortly after I came here, I got seriously into coaching, and I used to go to a lot of seminars and so on. And I ended up in a lecture that was being given by a guy called Lothar Osender, who's still alive. And he coached the U.S. Men's soccer team at Barcelona in 1992 at the Olympics. And it was very interesting because what he talked about, his talk was actually the power of diversity. And that's something that's stuck with me ever since then. And I actually wrote to him the other day, and I said, I'm going to be doing this little interview, and thank you. I want to thank you for what I heard from you in 1992. And what he spoke about was how, prior to that, the USA was just trying to get into soccer, not as powerful as they are now. And they pretty much used well-educated players that came from the Ivy League colleges and those sorts of things, right? And they were pretty much all white, no diversity at all. And he came over, he was a professional player in Germany, and he came over and changed all of that because he knew one thing. He knew that they needed to survive as a group. They didn't have the top players in the world, but they needed each other. And that's what his talk was about. And he spoke a lot about, you know, they would go to a consulate's house or something, and then the guys from the Ivy League would say, hey, here's how you behave, here's what you do. And then they'd walk through a tough area of town, and the guys from East LA or something would say, hey, don't make eye contact.
Don't wear blue and red.
Yeah, so they helped each other out, yeah. Exactly.
So man, that's an interesting topic too. I feel like we're going to miss some stuff because I'm just going to get stuck. But the idea that you learned soccer in terms of the team needing each other and the power and diversity, how has that affected you in business? Because as a business leader, and I know lots of people here are business leaders, one of the struggles I've always had is understanding priorities, and that my priority is not necessarily going to be my sales team's priorities, and each individual is going to have different priorities. How do you morph this priority idea to we all need each other, we have a team, and did that affect how you ran business? Do you feel like you applied that to your business?
Absolutely. I think I've been amazed at the similarities that you find in coaching sports and running a business. It's much the same thing. We got to get each other to work for each other, to work together. And I think that also, I mean, it would be easy, and I know people who do carry hatred from whatever happened in the past, and it would be easy to say that. But I actually employ white South Africans, and with no bitterness, and let them see that, you know, we can work together, and we can put the past behind us, and we can move on.
That's incredible. So, in terms of the soccer, like I mentioned, I think on my Facebook, I said Percy Hoff's going to be our guest, and a few of my friends popped up, Percy Hoff, soccer. So, and I know that that's a big thing for you, and has always been. I guess there's a two-part question. A, why did you get involved with soccer here? And B, is community involvement something you've realized is also great for business? Not necessarily the reason you do it, but have you seen kind of an effect of your community involvement? But first, why soccer? Why did you get involved with coaching? Because you've put a lot of time into it.
Right. You know, I think it came more from a giving aspect than from a taking aspect. So I don't really expect anything back from business for soccer, because nobody watches soccer anyway. But
I
no,
watched the
seriously.
highlights. I watched that bicycle kick.
Yeah.
TSN today.
It's improving.
Ronaldo, he did a great kick.
Yeah, there you go.
At least they told me it was great. Anyway.
Yeah, but no, to be serious, it was about giving something back to society. I mean, we'll be forever thankful to Canadian society and to Canadians in general for giving us the opportunity to come to a great country. My mom came here, I call it Trudeau version 1.0. But she always wrote back and told us what a great leader she thought Trudeau was and what a great country she thought this was. And yeah, you do get, you know, the odd person that's on either extreme, that still has something about them that's not quite right. But generally speaking, I think we're pretty safe in saying that we're almost a classless, raceless society, right? And I think we should be proud about that.
Yeah, that's interesting. So, I mean, you moved here in '82. Huge social change happened in South Africa after you came.
Yes.
Are you now a full Canadian citizen? It doesn't matter. I'm just curious.
Yeah, I did that as fast
Okay,
as I
thank
could.
God. We can do this interview.
I'll tell you why, though.
Okay, tell me why.
What happened shortly before we left South Africa is that at the beginning, so let me take a step back. I got to describe the racial situation in South Africa. So in South Africa, you have all these different classes of people. So I was classified as a colored person, which purely meant that I had on my paternal side, my grandfather came from Holland, and my African mother, hence the surname, and on my mother's side, Irish and African. And so any mixed people like ourselves were called colored people. So I was classified as colored at the time. What was the question again? Sorry.
I was just talking about the differences. Like, so you became a Canadian citizen, but you saw a lot of difference.
Right.
So you became a Canadian citizen. You were going to tell us why. Yeah.
So at the beginning, we weren't good enough to be members of the armed forces. But as things got a little bit tighter and the whole world started turning against South Africa, they started forcing people of color to go into the armed forces. And they could take you from anywhere in the world. So the quicker we could get Canadian citizenship, the faster we were out of it. Now, I do hold dual citizenship, and I did it just a matter of principle, because last year, actually, they passed a rule saying that if you gave up your citizenship under duress, you could have it back. So I have dual citizenship now, but I travel on a Canadian passport.
Well, and South Africa is a tremendously different country now.
Completely different.
As it was.
Yeah. The problem they got right now, well, not a problem, but one of the issues they have right now is that they have what they call the born frees. And the born frees don't recognize the struggle that people like Mandela fought. And actually, I don't know whether to be proud of myself or not, because a lot of people, this was a big debate when we left, is whether you want to stand up and be counted and be part of the struggle, or you're going to run. We chose to run. But, you know, we go back and the debate still comes up. Yeah. You know.
It's interesting you say, like, they call them born free, because in a way, your kids were born free. So how has that been as a dad? You know the struggle you had in the country you immigrated from, and then you plug away, you start your businesses, and your kids have free education until university.
Right.
Dad probably paid for university if they wanted to go. How has that been from you and your wife's perspective, raising your children not to be these privileged, whatever the word would be that I can't say on Shaw TV?
Yeah, or unprivileged. Well, really, freedom, right? I mean, they know no different. I've taken them back. We've been back and had a look around and tried to get them to understand what it was like. But even that's difficult now because it's so changed and so different.
You've kind of glossed over your soccer stuff. Like you have had huge impact on the soccer culture in Saskatoon, probably Saskatchewan. Like why? Is it just that you loved soccer? And I mean, I've watched the movies, rugby, soccer. I know how the culture systems work in Africa, in South Africa. Why was it so important for you? Did you just love the sport, or was it a love of sport, but you also wanted to teach people here? Was it like, what was the soccer culture when you moved here?
Yeah, well, it was non-existent. I remember the first World Cup that took place while I was here. I couldn't even find results in the newspapers. But really, to be honest, and I think this is what really gets missed with some of our kids these days, is that we're so worried about where they're going to end up and whether they're going to be professional players or university players. I just had fun as a kid. It was just a good time. And that stuck with me forever. I still try and hobble around and play now with Rob.
So how was that ideology then focused on you giving back to the kids? Was it a focus on the kids having an outlet where they could have fun, where you could teach them some skills, but also there's been some competitive nature. So how is your, I mean, obviously that kind of vision, that idea translates into the students you're teaching, but why? Like, why would you give, I mean, you've immigrated to Saskatoon, you're starting your own business, you have 3 kids. Why are you giving up more time for strangers? Well,
one thing that really I enjoy doing is watching kids get confidence and improve. It's really good to see that and see how they move along, and some of them, it really brings them out of their shells. I think the other thing I realized too is, see, I tried to golf, and that's a big problem. So, so I realized that if you can do something and you're quite proficient at it, you tend to have more fun at it.
Yeah, that's fair. Right. See, in Saskatchewan, it's like one of the highest golfers per capita, and their ideology is just drink. If there's a sport that you can drink while you're doing it, it's probably the best sport there is.
Well, I have a cousin-in-law called Trevor Joshua back in South Africa, and Trevor was just about a professional golfer. So he took me out one day, and we went, it was at a Holiday Inn casino in Swaziland, and we went out and we did the first round. We came back, and he said to me, I'll be with you shortly. So he went out, and when we were ready to go back and do the next round, he had about 25 young guys that he had hired to come and pick my balls out of He said, I got you some ball finderers.
Yeah, that's one of my favorite things about the Synergy 8 golf tournament is they say always like, unless it's a family heirloom, don't go look for it. Because after a few, there's a lot of people hacking. So you didn't just coach in soccer. Like that you've been really involved with the association. How did that start? Like, was there even an association when you came here? You just knock on the door and say, I'd like to coach, and then they saw that you were good and said, okay, do all of this stuff. Like, tell us more about what you're doing in the soccer world, what you've done, and what you're doing in that.
Right. Well, yeah, it started out with, I was living out in Warman at the time, because the house where we used to have to leave to change our minds got a little bit small. So we moved out to Warman, and I started the Warman Soccer Association out there. Okay. And I was at a coaching course, and one of the instructors saw me, and he eventually moved on to become the president of the Saskatchewan Soccer Association. But he really encouraged me to go along and increase my education in it. And I really had a good time because I traveled the world. I spent 8 weeks in Brazil, immersed in soccer. I went back for another 6-week refresher. I've been to England, I've been to the Netherlands, I've been to Germany, I've been all over the show. So I really saw the world from a soccer perspective, and I wouldn't hesitate to do it again. It was a really good time.
And now that you've been doing it for so long, do you run into people you coached 15 years ago? They're like, hey, Percy,
You know what? That's one of the most satisfying things, because I run into so many people, and I think it proves that sport really takes people the right direction. And I run into so many young people that are engineers, doctors, whatever. And actually, somebody that I coached with ended up in hospital, and I went to go see him, and he said, "You won't believe who my cardiologist is." And I said, "Who?" He said, "Just wait, he's coming around." And when he came around was a boy that we had, man now, that we had coached together. Yeah.
That's crazy. So you talked a bit about, from a business leader perspective, how there's a lot of ties between sport and business leadership. How does that work individually? Like in terms of the individual that's successful in a sport versus an individual that's successful in business? Do you see same qualities? Do you see that those qualities are nurtured in sport?
Yeah.
And have you kind of approached coaching like that?
Yeah, I think there's, I was reading, here's an amazing fact. The country of Iceland has a little bit more people than Saskatoon in area. I think they have 329,000 people or something. Their soccer team is ranked 7th, I think, in Europe. They make top world competitions. So imagine the population of Saskatoon putting together soccer team. Not only that, they have 90 professionals that are playing across Europe. Of those 90 professionals, 19 of them are captains of their teams. And so I started doing some research on it to find out what made them different. And they talk a lot about this thing called grit. And they said they actually got it from the business world, and they started introducing it to soccer. So they play games, like when the kids are young, where one team will have 6 players and one will have 3, and they taught never to give up. They battle with those 3, and they keep going until they get something right. So they instill this theory of grit into all their players. And I think it's the same thing that you find in business people as well, because, you know, running a business it's like steering a ship. It's never going to be smooth all the time. It changes all the time. The economy, I mean, you can literally get trumped. And things change in a hurry.
It almost sounds like running a business is like when your mother-in-law visits.
Exactly. Oh, gosh,
You need grit. Yeah, you didn't say that. I said that.
so
she lives in Calgary. She doesn't get our Shaw TV.
I think the tenacity that you see in sports people that you know, struggle through setbacks, and you know, some of them break a leg. And I mean, I was looking at the guy that was in the snowboarding thing, how he struggled through it all. Yeah, Morris. And so that grit, that determination, that ability to fight through that and come back and survive, I think that happens in business as well.
And it sounds to me like that would be true to your story as well, grit. Dealing with adversity, trying to figure out what the next step is. So in '82, you started Saskatoon Diesel Services, right?
Yeah.
Over the past, I got to do quick math in my head, 26 years, where have you seen, because the economy has changed in that time.
Very much so.
Up, down, up, flat.
Yeah.
What lessons have you learned through that process? Because, I mean, you're coming with a lot of world knowledge, a lot of life experience, but business is much like life. It's going to throw you some curveballs.
Yeah.
What are some times where you felt like, A, you had to use some grit, and B, if you could go back, you would have done it differently?
I think the biggest thing I had to do, and this was much younger, I would say when I was in my 30s, is learn to stop worrying. I used to worry all the time, couldn't sleep at night. And I learned through experience, I guess, that, you know, if I have a saying now my daughter's the same. She's that way. She's, you know, she panics about having to mark her. She's a teacher. She panics about having to mark all her papers and stuff. And I say to her, Jill, can you do anything about it right now? No. Well, don't worry about it. And that's sort of what I learned from it. And I've learned to handle the worrying side of it that way.
Is it that simple, though?
No.
Like, how did you deal with that? Because, like, I mean, everybody was like, yeah, you don't worry doesn't get you anywhere. Yeah, I don't know how to get out of this gear though. It's like the clutch is broken. How have you developed that? Is it just time?
I'm going to buy a vodka place.
Yeah. You sound like you're a golfer. But is it really that simple? Like, how did you get to that?
Well,
point?
no, you do. I think you have to work through it, but slowly it becomes your way of life. And really, it's one of the most destroying things is worrying when you can't do anything about it. So if you can't do anything, and again from sport, we tell players all the time, they complain about the referee or the rain or the sun. And can you do anything about it now? No. Well, let's get on with it, right? I think it just becomes a way of life eventually.
Yeah, fair enough. Did you, going back even to being in South Africa with the segregation and stuff, did you not deal with worry back then?
I think we're probably too scared to be worried. Oh, okay. I mean, it was brutal. You could be thrown into jail at any time for nothing. You have a young policeman that, and this has happened to me, you have a young policeman that's maybe been out drinking with his buddies, and he'll pick a fight with you, and you're in a cell somewhere. So I think we were so absorbed with making sure that we tread carefully through life that we didn't have time to really worry too much. And you know what, it was interesting because as much as we were oppressed and struggled, we had very carefree lives. When we got together on weekends, we partied and we had a good time. And maybe it was a way of forgetting what the issues were, but that's how we lived. We lived a very carefree life.
So, I mean, in business, you said, look, a lesson that you've had in your brain was not to worry. But there's a part B to that. Like, it's not just not worrying and don't ever think about it again. It's not worrying and then addressing it when you can.
Right.
So in your 26 years, you've seen the economy change. You've seen business go up and down. You've been able to navigate the worry part, the fear. But what have you done practically to deal with those obstacles?
That's a great question, yeah. Well, as I said earlier, is that I think that you have things that you go with the flow and things that you fight. And when it comes down to it, I think it goes back to that grit thing again. Now is a bad time. 3 years ago, we were having a best year ever. Now it's different. And so I sat down with my son this morning and we said, what are we going to do? And you got to practically plan. I mean, where can we save costs? The last thing I try and do is get rid of people because especially in our business, it's all skilled people. They don't come easy. So we got to battle to find them. So we try and hold on to them. But what can we do? How can we reduce costs? One of the first things we do is reduce travel, cut back on our training, which is a little bit of a scary thing, but I mean, you got to do that. And then the faith that it's going to come back, But as soon as it was amazing, as soon as the oil price dropped, it's like the bottom fell out of everything. And potash went the same way almost at the same time, a little bit earlier. But it's practical management, I think, and recognizing that you're going to have to fight those battles and you're going to have to do some practical things along the way. But I would say to people, hang on to your people. And people that you hang on to tend to not forget it. They become loyal. And happy people is the other thing. I think that in business, if you've got people, there was a company, or is a company still called Kinko's, and their motto used to be, happy people ring cash registers. And if your staff is happy and you get along and there's a sense of togetherness in the business, I think it's just like a sports team. It can work properly.
Yeah, it's with oil crashing and potash crashing, and then Darla took over the chamber. You came right at the peak. Good timing. So, I mean, you worry, you decided, okay, look, these are the things, these are the strategies. But the strategy of people, that's a great example of business isn't really about the leadership as much as it is about the people. The people are in the front lines. Did you learn that by experience? Like, have you cut some of your skilled people in the past, or did you feel like you were cut and you realized that it leaves such a void, and that's why you don't want to do it anymore? Or is it just a personal thing? You really like people and you don't want to see them leave?
You know what? That's exactly it. I'm down beneath. I'm very, very soft, and for me, till today, I've let people
like all soccer players.
Yeah,
I'm surprised you haven't faked an injury in this interview. Rolling around on the ground, grabbing your knee. Percy, I didn't even touch you. What's happening?
Till today, I've let people go over the years, not for layoffs, but for other reasons, and it's still one of the most difficult things I have to do. And I was surprised the other night. I was listening to television, and they were saying that Trump has a hard time firing people. So I thought, well, I'm in good company.
Yeah. Great company. Really, really the best company. So looking forward, obviously, with the way oil has been, way the economy has been, what do you see have been some of the best advantages for your business that Saskatoon has had in the last decade? And where do you see that going in the future? Do you feel optimistic about the future?
Well, yeah. I've always been an optimist, but better than that, my wife is like the eternal optimist. When I'm feeling down, she's the one that well, think of it this way. And she's got a different way of thinking about it. And that's all it is, really. It's how badly you want to think about it and how much you're going to let it depress you. It's changed a lot, though. Our business used to be about 85% farm related back in the 80s and middle 90s. And then we changed, and I got on the oil bandwagon. So maybe that wasn't the smartest decision. But then farming changed because, we did a lot of repair business in the old days. And now it's sort of captive to the OEMs. A lot of stuff you can't work on. It's got to go back to the OEMs. A lot of people started looking at their farm machinery in different ways. Rather than owning it, they would lease it and just turn it back in as soon as it got out of warranty. So there were a lot of things, and so there's this constant change, and the companies had to evolve. And so we've moved in different directions, and now we do a lot of power solutions. So we don't just look at ourselves as a diesel company anymore. We look at ourselves as we manufacture generator sets now. Okay. We sell generator sets. We sell skid steers and stuff like that. So we've had to branch out into a lot of different things. And I mean, we went from at one time I had 27 people fixing fuel injection pumps, and now I have 1.5 doing that. Because of the advent of electronics.
So where are you located?
We're just behind, it used to be the Sayast Heavy Duty School shop, right behind the Ramada Hotel.
Okay. And do you fix diesel Jettas?
Yep.
Oh, that's perfect.
We do.
I just want to say thanks so much for coming.
Yeah, it's been fun.
The story
Thank
of not only adversity, but courage, wisdom, and just tenacity, grit. And we have the same hairdresser.
Forced to go
Yeah. That's why every time you talk about that, I'm like, God, I need grit, because you keep making it fall out. Anyway. So thanks so much for being our guest.
Thank you very much.
Really
Evan.
appreciate it.
Appreciate it.